Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Kelsey Lyles. I'm Greenlining Institute's Health Equity Program Manager, and I'll be your host for the event today. Thank you for this wonderful welcome music and tunes, setting the great energy. And I appreciate you all taking the time to tune in to our town hall. The Greenlining Institute is a multi-ethnic policy and advocacy organization committed to advancing racial and economic justice in California. We work across topical areas like banking, health policy, environmental justice, and technology to embed a racial equity lens into corporate and government decision-making and ensure that policies, programs, and resources are benefiting the most vulnerable in our communities. While there are many important issues on the ballot, the purpose of today's conversation is to discuss how exercising our collective right to vote in November presents a unique opportunity for California to advance racial justice by restoring government's role in implementing race-conscious policies and advancing justice reform. For the full list of propositions that Greenlining has a formal position on, we invite you to refer to our proposition guide, which is available on our website. We'll also share a link to the endorsement guide in the chat in just a moment for you. We have so many great guest speakers today and a very full agenda that while there won't be time for audience question and answer, we invite you to please sign up for our listserv so that you can stay engaged. We will begin the day with a conversation about the opportunity of this moment with our President and CEO, Deborah Gore-Mann, and District Attorney of San Francisco, Chesa Boudin. Afterwards, we will transition into a panel about the importance of making affirmative action a reality in California. And lastly, we will get to chat with leading justice system reform advocates about the importance of making informed decisions on Propositions 17 and 20. So let's dive in. First, I'd like to share a little bit about our President and CEO, Deborah Gore-Mann, or Debbie as we call her. Debbie joins the Greenlining team with a background of in-depth strategic and business development expertise. Her work has spanned across the private, public, and political sectors in uplifting low-opportunity communities with funding, team building, and financial and people resources. Before joining Greenlining, she most recently led the San Francisco Conservation Corps, America's first urban municipal youth corps. And we're so grateful to have her leadership at Greenlining now. I would now like to invite Debbie and our guest, Chesa Boudin, to turn on their cameras and unmute their microphones and lead us through a conversation about how justice is on the ballot this November. I'll now turn things over to Debbie.
Thank you, Kelsey, for that introduction and getting us started. Welcome, District Attorney Chesa Boudin, to the town hall event titled Justice on the Ballot. So I'm very excited to have you at this event because your position and your work directly impacts and represents what justice is in our communities. For the good of the order, if there's anyone at this event who may not know about your march towards equitable justice, please indulge me while I share a bit about your background.
Absolutely, thank you for having me.
Okay, great. You were elected as the San Francisco District Attorney in the 2019 election. You campaigned on a platform of decarceration and the fundamental observation that tough on crime policies were just not working. The reason I think it's important to hear your voice today is based on your vision that aligns with Greenlining's and many other organizations who have been working to demand racial equity in our society. In particular, I hope I get this right, your vision includes prioritizing healing and reducing harm, remembering victims and the use of restorative justice, recognizing every person's human potential, defining reasonable punishment, and searching for ways that when people who have been incarcerated will ultimately be returned to our communities to live with us, and that those who return do so in a safe, productive, and supportive way. So that's a small amount of information about DA Boudin's vision for a progressive criminal justice system. And also, we are coming out of a month of September, having witnessed, and by the way, each month is like a year, having witnessed the passing away of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Supreme Court's feminist icon, Breonna Taylor and the lack of charges against the police officers for her killing, ongoing COVID-19 impact on all of us, and the fact that the pandemic has killed over 112,000 Americans, and a presidential debate where one candidate made comments supporting a white supremacy organization. So I'm excited to engage in a discussion with you now, DA Chesa-Boudin, to get your perspective on the urgency of this moment and our upcoming elections. So first, did I get it mostly right on your reform platform?
You did a great job. I think I'm going to tap you to come hit the campaign trail with me in a few years when I'm up for re-election. You really, you nailed it. And I appreciate you giving that introduction and summary, and appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today.
Well, let's dive right in. The clock is ticking, and we've got so many great panelists to discuss the ballot. So since you were sworn in by Mayor London Breed in January, can you describe your work and the progress you've been making so far? And just a little bit of background, I joined in October as the leadership for Greenlining. So I too have done more leadership in sheltering in than in the actual seat. So I would welcome your perspective on how things are going with the progressive agenda around this movement.
Absolutely. Well, I stepped in January to an office that had a solid foundation for reform, but like so much of America's criminal justice system, was failing us in profound ways. And I ran on a campaign of ending mass incarceration, a campaign of addressing racial disparities, and focusing on healing and restoration rather than draconian punishments that we know set people up for failure, even as they tear families and communities apart, with horrific racial disparities in the process. So since I took office, it's been a crazy year. Obviously, COVID-19 has changed everything. The election coming up has a lot of folks on edge, understandably. And we've been trying our best to move forward and fulfill our campaign promises to really radically reform the criminal justice system, even in the midst of all those challenges. So let me give you a few of the highlights of things we've been able to accomplish this year so far.
Yes, please do.
When COVID-19 hit, San Francisco's jail medical director made very clear that she could not keep the jail population safe from COVID at the existing levels of people who were housed in jail, of people who were incarcerated there. She reached out to me and other justice leaders, and she said, you have to cut the jail population now. And I said, great, that's something I ran on doing. I actually want to close jails. I think we can make our communities safer if we invest in families and people instead of more jails and prisons. So since I took office, we reduced the jail population by approximately 40%. And all the while, crime rates have been falling. Overall crime in San Francisco is down 20% since I took office. All the fearmongers and all the tough on crime Trumpsters that argue if you let anybody out of jail, or if you let them out sooner, crime rates will go up. Well, we've proved them wrong in San Francisco. Crime rates are down, the jail population is down, and we've actually closed one of our county jails in the process. So I'm really proud about that work. The other thing we've done is we've stepped up our support for crime victims in a couple different categories. Obviously, a lot of the racist, tough on crime policies are justified in the name of victims' rights. And yet the criminal justice system actually ignores victims most of the time, tramples on them, treats them as pieces of evidence rather than as people who need to be healed and supported. We've significantly expanded our domestic violence support work, creating several different streams of housing in partnership with many different local businesses to ensure domestic violence victims have a safe place to go and a safe way to get to help when they need it. We've also started treating victims of police violence the same way that other crime victims are treated. We give them access to the same benefits and the same services. We don't want a mother to have to resort to GoFundMe pages to pay for funeral or burial costs just because the person who killed her son was a police officer rather than someone else. We've worked in partnership with Supervisor Shaman Walton on San Francisco's Board of Supervisors to author a resolution that would prohibit San Francisco from hiring law enforcement officers with a known history of serious misconduct.
Mm.
And we also recognize that one of the main ways in which racism manifests in the daily lives of Black and brown people interacting with the state is the phenomenon known as driving while brown or driving while Black. That police officers in San Francisco for decades and with tremendous amounts of well-documented data have systematically stopped Black and brown drivers and pedestrians at rates far disproportionate to those for people who look like me, and that those stops more often lead to searches than when people like me are stopped. Recognizing that, we implemented a policy that we will no longer be complicit in stop and frisk style policing tactics that violate civil rights. We will decline to file criminal charges stemming from those kinds of pretextual traffic stops. We've also implemented a policy of not prosecuting peaceful protesters because we believe that civil disobedience has played a critical role in the history of change and social change and righteous rage in this country, in the civil rights movement, in the anti-war movement, and in the movement in response to the murder of George Floyd. I was at many of those protests. I refused to prosecute people engaged in peaceful acts of protest. We developed a policy of not calling police officers who we cannot rely on and not putting them on the witness stand. If they have a history of perjury or serious misconduct, we will not rely on their word to prosecute criminal cases any longer. Now, I could keep going.
Yeah.
Let me just stop with two highlights. And I'll be
Because I have a bunch of questions too, DA Boudin, so.
Two other things. I'm just going to mention two more things that I'm really proud of.
Okay.
We did right out of the gate is we ended cash bail.
Yes, yes.
And we created a primary caregiver diversion program because we believe that parents at home with their children make all of us safer than having those parents in jail and the kids home alone.
Okay, well, let's jump right into the propositions. You did hit on a lot of the racial disparity and equity issues, but let's just, Prop 16, you know, we are a strong advocate of it so that we can provide programs and employment and education. How, if we could pass, well, hopefully when we pass Proposition 16, the allowance of race-conscious policies, how will that impact your office? I know you touched on some of them, but I just want you to speak to Prop 16.
Absolutely. Look, the racial disparities we see in the criminal justice system are not limited to policing and prosecution and sentencing. We are the end of the road for so much discrimination throughout our society, for so much systemic white supremacy. And so if we really want to make our communities safer, if we really want to decrease the horrific racial disparities in our jails and prisons, we have to think broader and we have to move upstream. Proposition 16 does exactly that. It's why I'm also supporting it. I was proud to vote yes on Proposition 16. And let's cut to the chase. Proposition 16 allows government to begin to do the work of remedying the centuries of institutionalized legal racism and discrimination going back to slavery in this country. We haven't remedied it, we haven't fixed it, and when we see racism and discrimination in housing, in employment, in education, in healthcare, those problems and the inability because of a Republican passed proposition in 1996 for government to address that systemic racism actually makes it more likely that people will get arrested, more likely they'll get convicted, and on a path to prison. We want to avoid that. Proposition 16 gives government the tools to fix those wrongs.
Thank you. Okay, so those who might be undecided on Prop 17 and 20, so can you share your views on the two citizen-initiated propositions that directly impact the criminal justice system? So 17, which is restoring the voting rights for people convicted of felonies who are on parole, and Prop 20, criminal sentencing and parole and DNA collection. Can you weigh in on those two?
Absolutely. I'm a big supporter of Proposition 17. I have been since the movement, as you said, the people's movement, the citizen movement, to put it on the ballot. And at the end of the day, this is about restoring our democracy. We look around the country today, we look at what the Trump administration is doing to undermine democracy and democratic practices. Proposition 17 brings us back to our roots of giving people the right to vote and have a say in the government that makes laws that they have to abide by and that controls them. basically what Proposition 17 does is allows people who have been released from prison to vote. They've served their time, they've paid their debt, and we are welcoming them home to our communities, and we need them to succeed. We need them to avoid committing a new crime and going back to prison. And to do that, we want them to have a stake. We want them to be full participants in society. Proposition 17 allows them to do that and to be that.
Excellent. Okay, so you are part of actually a movement of progressive reform-minded prosecutors who have set a new precedence of elections and platforms. Your peers in the movement, Rachel Rollins, the DA of Suffolk County, which includes Boston, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, Kim Foxx, Cook County, which includes Chicago. How is that national decarceration movement going?
You know, it's going unbelievably well. It's a great thing to be a part of, and it's actually the movement that inspired me to run for district attorney in the first place. I looked around the country when I went to law school, and I knew I wanted to fight to end mass incarceration, and that's why I became a public defender at the time. But in the last 5 years, we have seen people like the ones you mentioned step up and win elections to lead district attorneys' offices on a vision of public safety that recognizes we are safer when our communities are strong. We are healthier when we actually protect and heal victims instead of just treat them as pieces of evidence. That prison is not the first solution to so many of our social problems, and it has been treated that way for too long. I am excited to be part of this movement. We are building momentum every single election cycle. We see more people win in Portland and in Boston and across Texas and even in Mississippi. People running on platforms committed to decreasing our reliance on jails and prisons are winning races. And we're winning races and we're building unity, and we are showing through hard work that our policies actually make us safer, save money, and treat people, whether accused of crimes or victims of crimes, with the dignity that we all expect and deserve.
Yeah, and this is not without a battle. I mean, you're going up against a lot of institutional entities and long-standing traditions. So can you share your views a bit around reform versus dismantling policing and the desire of the community to defund the police? Can you just share with us a bit of that conversation? And let me just put a shameless plug in. You have a podcast where you had Angela Davis speak in depth about this. So we can talk about your podcast as well. But can you talk about that distinction of reform versus dismantling and defunding the police, who in effect is a really close partner of yours in this criminal, I say in parentheses, justice system?
Exactly, Debbie. No, well said. And these are complicated issues. I'll shamelessly put in a plug since you prompted me. Chasing Justice is the name of our podcast.
Okay, was that intentional? and chasing justice? I thought that was pretty clever.
I got to give credit to Rachel Marshall, my co-host, for coming up with the title. She's great. We have wonderful guests: James Foreman, Angela Davis, Rachel Rollins, and others. It's personal. It's political. We take a deep dive into a lot of these complicated policy issues and reform issues. We talk about the movement, and definitely check it out, Chasing Justice. We just finished our first season. But to
reform and dismantle and then defunding.
Yeah, to the heart of your question, I think that for decades, if you look at the way local and state government has treated law enforcement and the prison industrial complex, they've been basically given more and more money every year without question. It's just not something Democrats, Republicans are willing, doesn't matter. They're not willing to cut the budget of local law enforcement or of the prison system. And we're starting to see that change. We're starting to see a national conversation that, the defund movement, in my view, is really about demanding that we take the same level of scrutiny to police budgets that we take to public health budgets and public education budgets. And what that means is questioning how we can best use, in a city like San Francisco, the $700 million a year that goes to our police if we're focused on public safety. Could we do a better, more efficient job spending tax dollars if 100 million or 200 million of that money went to develop an emergency response team of social workers and mental health crisis workers instead of just having police respond to every call for help? Is there some other way we can invest that money in creating jobs or housing or drug treatment that would do a better job than investing in police has done for us of building safety in our communities? And I think it's an important conversation to have. We've been having it for decades with every other area of government, and it's important that we think critically about how we spend our tax dollars, especially in an area as critical as public safety.
Okay, we've got about 2 minutes left here, 3 minutes left here. Wanted to, you're mentioning that folks can get involved with the effort. What can the everyday citizen do? Now, we are absolutely representing today, vote, 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 vote. But what can the everyday citizen do to support racial equity in our local communities as it relates to justice and the work you do?
Well, let me just say, Debbie, right now, people have a really important opportunity to vote. The election is less than a month away. Early ballots have already been delivered to many voters. I didn't mention specifically, but please, please, please vote no on Proposition 20. It would undo years worth of positive reforms that have been shown through tremendous amounts of research to decrease racial biases, to decrease crime, and it would take us back to the tough on crime era of the 1990s that we know failed us and failed our communities. So one thing everybody can do is vote yes on 16, yes on 17, and no on 20. That is an immediate thing you can do. You can get your friends and family and community out to vote on those propositions. And then pay attention to your local district attorney races. Pay attention to your local police commission meetings. Get involved at the local level. One thing that the Trump era has taught us is that some of the most important changes are happening at the local level. And that's precisely where each and every one of you can be most impactful. So get involved at the local level, hold people like me accountable, make sure you're creating political space for elected leaders to implement the kinds of policies that are going to impact you and your community in a positive way.
Great. So I think we have about, so let me just check in. There's so much movement happening, and I'm wondering how you see. We kind of call it the inside-outside strategy. I feel like you're the inside strategy because you're inside trying to make the change, and we need the outside. And there seems to be an awakening right now because of the Black movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, of the demand for justice for Black women. The awakening that's happening right now, how can we take advantage and make sure that it's just not a moment and that it's a movement that makes a change?
Yeah, I think there's always a risk of exactly what your question, frames, Debbie. That this is just a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
We have companies like Nike and Walmart tweeting out, from their official accounts, Black Lives Matter. But we need to work every day to convert the righteous rage in the streets and the national energy around this movement into concrete policy reforms and into concrete results at the polls this November. That's how we make the change last. We have specific requests, we turn those requests into demands, and you hold people like me accountable to implementing those demands.
Excellent. Okay. I think we are at the end of our time, and I really appreciate the conversation and the ability for us to really encourage people to enact the policies that you need to use as an insider, and that we as at Greenlining, we have both an inside and an outside position to help us create the change for communities of color and for women. So thank you again for your time, and we will send it back over to Kelsey.
Thank you. Have a great day, Debbie. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and also District Attorney Chesa. That was a really energizing, grounding conversation. I see that we have 238 participants on the webinar. Welcome, everyone. I wrote down from that last conversation, investing in families and people, not jails and prisons. I feel like that was the tagline. As we now transition into our next conversation on the importance of voting yes on Proposition 16, I just want to emphasize that this is a key priority for the Greenlining Institute, and we're so thrilled to be able to support the Opportunity for All Coalition and all of their hard work on this effort. By making affirmative action a reality, it would open a lot of doors and opportunities for government. Specifically, we're thinking about everything from having a diverse workforce to increased contracts and procurement with diverse businesses, even in budget allocation and investment. There are a number of racial equity and racial justice implications. So we're really just thrilled to help support this proposition. I will now like to invite Andy Wong to turn on his camera and mute his microphone. Andy is a leader at the Opportunity for All Coalition. He is the Yes on Prop 16 campaign manager. And we're so happy to have him here today to moderate this next panel. I'd also like to welcome Assemblymember Dr. Weber, Assemblymember Santiago, and Assemblymember Gibson, as well as Dejan Grace, a Greenlining Institute colleague and Youth Voice perspective. So thank you all for being here, for taking the time, and I will turn things over to Andy to lead us in this next segment.
Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Kelsey, and thank you to Greenlining for hosting this important conversation. Justice, equity, and opportunity are indeed on the ballot in California. I think everyone here believes in giving folks, regardless of race or gender, an equal shot at fair wages, good jobs, and quality schools. But we are not there yet. We all know the statistics, but it bears repeating. Women in California still earn less than 80 cents on the dollar compared to white men. And it's far less for women of color and single moms. And people of color and women continue to face discrimination in hiring, employment, contracting, and education. You know, it can be hard sometimes to know where to start tackling systemic racism and sexism. But Prop 16 ends California's ban on affirmative action to help level the playing field. And it is a concrete step we can take to begin removing barriers to equal opportunity for all. I'm excited to start today's discussion on Prop 16 with leaders in the state legislature who successfully passed ASAFE 5, the bill that got Prop 16 placed on the November 2020 ballot. Many thought it couldn't be done, but Assembly members Weber, Santiago, Gibson, and others believed. They fought, they organized, and they did get the job done. And I'd like to begin with Dr. Weber, who's known as the moral conscience in the Capitol. She helped sponsor ASAFE 5, and she's now been on the campaign trail to help get Prop 16 passed. Good morning, Dr. Weber. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Good morning, it's great to be here.
My question to you, Dr. Weber, is this. California is known for its progressive values, yet racial inequality is deeply entrenched in our state. How can we advance racial equity and justice without affirmative action? And how has the ban on affirmative action impacted your role as a legislator?
Well, I appreciate that question because I think those of us who remember post or pre-Prop 209, remember affirmative action and the opportunities that were there and available to us to make a difference, realize how hard it has been for the last 24 years to arrive to a level of, to deal with the issues of equity and fairness and justice without affirmative action. And I think that's why so many states have maintained affirmative action kind of as the guardrails for themselves to make sure that when they confront these issues and try to find resolutions to them, they can do it. It is almost impossible to deal with the issue of equity and justice without affirmative action. It just adds more layers and more layers to a simple task at hand. And so as we attempt to do things that bring justice and equality into California in so many areas, whether it's education, whether it's contracting, employment, all those kinds of things, there's such a huge barrier, even though we all recognize that, that there's some inequality. And so it becomes almost impossible to try to right it and to give and level the playing field because the inequality and those in charge continue to amass the resources, get the jobs, get the opportunities, get the positions, and those who are struggling to get in still are confronted with that without any effort at all to recognize that there's systemic racism in every aspect of our society that's so entrenched in our culture that it makes it difficult. I've had difficulty just trying to get things done when I know there's a problem, like educating kids, you know, kids who are left behind, oftentimes because of how the system is structured, the racism that's there. And so as I try to target, say for instance, African-American males or poor Black kids at the bottom, I have to go through so many other steps. I have to make sure, you have to use zip codes. And sometimes that doesn't work. Most of the time it doesn't. Then we have to talk about poverty. Then we have to talk about this. And by the time you layer all these things as how you're going to try to get to these kids, you still miss many of them because those are often not the variables that impact them. And so every time we get ready to do something that's targeted, like I did with the $300 million to help these kids who are perpetually failing, I'm confronted with the attorneys. Oh, you can't do that. Prop 209 says you can. You can't have a special program. Even though you know you have a problem, you can't solve the problem. And so that's been the ongoing challenge. How do you deal with equity? Equity is talking about giving people what they need, not just giving everybody the same thing. And at the end, bringing everybody up to the same level. It's almost an impossible task and a long, difficult road.
Doctor, I really appreciate that. And, you know, one thing that I think is very revealing in terms of your response is that there's often this misnomer that affirmative action is simply about higher ed admissions. And it really is not just about college admissions. It's about its impacts are far ranging, and they include impacts at the K-12 level. You know, I work in an organization, you know, in addition to managing the Prop 16 campaign, I work in an organization called the Education Trust West, and we've been really focused on the, you know, K-12 as well as higher education. And we know that the ban on affirmative action has impacts at the K-12 level that you mentioned. So for instance, you know, the state legislature can't invest resources in terms of diversifying our educator workforce and bringing in more teachers of color because, as you noted, that might be a Prop 209 violation. And so I really appreciate you talking about how the ban on affirmative action has many impacts that are far-ranging and that span not just higher education, but also K-12, and that it really shackles, I think, our legislators from being able to do more. And, you know, again, I'm so grateful for your leadership in this fight. My next question is to Assemblymember Santiago. You know, as you noted previously, we are in desperate times. Communities of color are in the middle of a depression, and COVID-19 has exacerbated racial inequities. Why do you believe now is the time to restore affirmative action in California?
Hey, thanks, Andy, and everybody else who's on here today. I urge everybody when we get off this to tweet, to text, to Facebook, or to spread the word in any way you can, your email list. And I wouldn't be true to the cause if I didn't ask people to pitch in, right? So you know, $5, $1. I mean, this is how we get things done, because those in power rarely ever give it up. We've got to fight for it, and let's be honest, it takes a little bit of work. You know, we're all gonna have to give our chip in, and we're gonna have to campaign as hard as we possibly can, or it will not happen. So yes, on Prop 16, and I'm asking for everybody's commitment here to do something about it when you get off this call. So I appreciate that. But you know, having said that, I think when we look at the pandemic and when we looked at COVID-19, I think it's fair to say, and all of us understand, that those communities of colors have been hit the worst, right? It's not going to surprise anybody here for me to say that if you're a low-income working Latino household, or you come from an immigrant community like the ones I represent, or if you're African American, or I represent areas of Koreatown too, where you have Koreans who are poor. And I represent Little Tokyo, where you have a Japanese community of seniors who are on fixed incomes. I think it's fair to say that those communities have been left behind during COVID. They couldn't go to their second home to quarantine. They couldn't stay at home because people have to go to work. And when we see our neighborhoods, those going to work on the bus, those living in condensed apartment units, those frontline workers come from our communities, and they've been hit the hardest. When we pick up the paper, it's almost every morning we read a story about the digital divide, and it's not going to surprise anyone that it's in our communities. We've seen the pictures of kids outside of fast food restaurants looking for internet access. Well, that picture was taken right up the street from my neighborhood. And it's not going to surprise anybody that we're going to have a generation of low-income communities of color whose kids have been left behind. So the question is, what do we do with it? We've also seen the demonstrations across the street, across our streets in California and across the nation, asking for racial justice and demanding it. And you know, when you take a look at this is the perfect time to do it. We know that inequities had hit our communities the hardest. We know that there's that demand for change, and we're not going to stop until we get it. And we need to pass Prop 16 in order to have the tools to be able to identify those communities who have been left behind. Look, when we take a look at Skid Row, an area that I represent that has historically for generations had thousands of people living on the street, I don't think it's going to surprise very many people that the larger percentage of population there is African American. But when you take a look at some of the other areas I represent, those who have been unable to pay the rent, those who have landed on the streets, those who lost their jobs, who are living in cars. Take a look at some of those communities. They're Latino folks who are out there sleeping in cars. We need to be able to say, look, these populations of people have been left behind, and we can do something about it because we know what the data tells us. We know that we can pass legislation or advance monies in these areas to address these very particular populations. And I think I'll piggyback on what Dr. Weber had said. We don't want to have to put 15 layers of disciplines and policy just to get to that small percentage. Here's my little kid right here. To get to that small percentage of population that we're trying to address. What we're going to want to be able to say is, we know that I'll speak for my community like others will speak for theirs. We know that a large generation of Latinos have not been able to get on the internet, have not been able to be adequately educated, are going to be left behind, and we need to address this issue. We know that there's a certain population a certain population in this culture who has been left behind. Let's put some monies behind it. We can't do that right now because under Prop 209, you can't use race, gender, or any other being of that person to be able to address those issues. But yeah, that's my little kid. He's a dad. He gets into all this stuff. He's hardcore. And look, and I think I appreciate Andy.
So I'm
Yeah.
almost done.
Almost done, baby. Almost done. We go out and do exercises in the middle of the day. So he's in a Zoom. He's on a Zoom classroom as he comes back. Look, it's not just about college admissions. It's also about government contracts, and that's critical because that's where the wealth is at. And it's also about state employment. And I've said this before. For us, it's not just about getting a state job. It's also about the management jobs that pay well. We don't want to be the ones who clean the bathrooms for generations to come. We want to get into some management. Right now, when we identify what management looks like and we identify who does the work, we can't address that. It was, but we definitely need to pass Prop 16. And Andy, thank you for giving me the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with you folks. But I can't urge you enough to get engaged, to do something about it, to be active, to pick up a phone, to join a phone bank, or do whatever you can. $5. I challenge everybody on this call right now. Get on, chip in your $5 and get 5 friends to do $5. It ain't that hard. Let's do this.
Assemblymember Santiago, we so appreciate your energy and enthusiasm for this fight. You happen to be among our most active campaign surrogates, and we can't thank you enough for your leadership. And, you know, it's interesting, you know, in your response, you talk about the other areas that Prop 16 would impact, including public hiring and employment and government contracting. And those are really, really key areas that have lots and lots of implications for people of color and women. You know, with respect to government contracting, we know that $1 billion is lost annually for women and minority-owned businesses because of this ban on affirmative action. Just imagine all the wealth that could be going into our communities to help close the racial and gender wealth gap. And because of this ban on affirmative action, that gap continues to widen. And similarly, with respect to public employment, you know, our educator workforce, our healthcare workforce, our first responder workforce don't reflect the diversity of our state. And just imagine all the implications when students don't have teachers that look like themselves, when first responders aren't able to engage with communities in a linguistically or culturally competent fashion, or when you have shortages of doctors of color, you know, how does that affect public health as it relates to communities of color? I mean, the impacts are really vast, and I appreciate you, Assembly Member, for laying that all out there.
And I'll just say the last thing, we do the same work. It should be outraged. We should be outraged that a woman makes 80 cents on the dollar that a male makes. And if you're a woman of color, I mean, you could be looking at 60 to 43 cents compared to a male white counterpart for the exact same work.
That's right. That's right. It is appalling and it's shameful, and we need to do something about it. So why don't we move on to Assemblymember Gibson? Assemblymember, good morning. My question to you is this: the ban on affirmative action has impacted an entire generation of Black and Brown students, workers, and businesses. What potential do you see Prop 16 in helping us reimagine equal opportunity in California?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you very much to all that's on the call. And Andy, thank you very much. And my colleagues, Dr. Weber, and also Miguel. It's great seeing you and hearing from you. I want to thank you guys for Greenlining, for putting us all together. To answer your question directly, the passage of Proposition 16 will help us reimagine equal opportunity in our state by restoring the California's dream of equal opportunity, not for some, but for all. We must do everything that we can to level the playing field, because the playing field, Andy, is not level, Ashley. And when you look at 25 years ago, when people in California were sold a bill of goods, we were, in the words of Malcolm X, we were bamboozled, we were hoodwinked, we were led astray. People were going to the polls and voting and thinking that they were going to strengthen affirmative action in California, but when the final analysis, it was the absolute opposite of what people thought. And so we have an opportunity, Brother Grace, we have an opportunity to change the dynamic, to change the paradigm. When you have rich people writing large checks, who have the ability to write checks, to get their kids into affluent schools, and to really make a mockery. This is the reason why we need to roll back 209. Because the people that I represent, the people that Miguel Santiago represent, we don't have the ability to write big checks. We don't have the opportunity because the playing field is not level because of Proposition 209. And so it takes people like Dr. Weber and the Legislative Black Caucus, the Latino Caucus, the Jewish Caucus, the API Caucus, the LGBTQ Caucus, the Jewish Caucus, that all band together to making sure that we're able to rewrite a new narrative. And I believe this is going to level the playing fields and also give us the justice. Yes, it is about contracts, because when you have women, we have women, and especially women of color, who cannot receive contracts that they're qualified to receive because the good old boys network is in existence. We need fairness and justice to be leveled. When you also look at, and now Dr. Weber popped on, so I must be preaching. Let me calm the hell down. I'm sorry. When you look at our children who cannot get into colleges and universities through admissions, and their dreams have been shattered. Whether you are a dreamer who's dreaming, damn it, California is full of dreamers. Hell, I dream. And I want to make sure that my kids and the next generation can dream and also be able to have the best education that California can offer them so they can compete on the global scale. And so when we talk about Proposition 16, all it is about leveling the playing field. And I come up against, and I push back hard about the rhetoric that is reverse racism. Or hell, is it racism when people can have the checkbooks and the means to write a check because they matriculated because of mom and daddy's wealth and leaving everybody else behind and trying to level the playing field? Is that reverse racism? Well, that's creating opportunities that every man and woman should have. This is what California is all about. California is going to lead the way. Why should we have been 25 years ago being the first state to abolish affirmative action and damn it, the last state to try to bring it back? That's not right. And so I'm here today, along with the voice you've already heard, and making sure that we level the playing field for the next generation, for my grandchildren and so on, and yours as well. And so when you look at, again, the data, people have this belief that it helps them, and it really doesn't. And so we're just simply saying that, one, change is coming, and change is here. It's happening right now. And it's going to happen in the next 27 days in California.
Assemblymember Gibson, thank you so much for your powerful remarks. I think we need to take you on the road and have you talk to others. You know, I appreciate your passion, your conviction, you know, and your fighting spirit. You know, this is a historic moment. This is a worthy cause. This is the fight that we all must wage, and just grateful for your voice. Why don't we, I'd love to circle back to Dr. Weber, because, you know, as we're talking about this notion of reimagining equal opportunity, I would love to get your take, Dr. Weber, on what potential policy developments do you foresee if Prop 16 passes, or you would wish to explore yourself? You know, when we pass Prop 16, what do you see are some of the potential policies that you would fight for, you know, in the wake of its passage?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do, as always, is make sure that the education that our kids are receiving is one of quality, that we do all we can to bolster that system, that we are able to do what we want to do, which is outreach and find teachers who look like the students and actually develop a program to accomplish that. You know, it's been a long time since we've had the kind of outreach necessary. When I was on the school board before 2009, we used to travel to Black colleges and recruit students right out of Black colleges because we knew we'd get good students who had great education, but also great passion. We even developed a program for ex-military. We here at the Navy, and we used to recruit men from the Navy who had actually finished, had a bachelor's degree, and we put them in a fast-track teacher training program. And those men have served for over 20 years now in the district. And they were African-American males because we wanted them in our classrooms for young men to see them and to do those things. So there's so many things that we're missing. We hope through through AB 3121, the reparations bill, that we can actually demonstrate in that bill just how deep and pervasive racism is, because people don't act like they don't understand the impact that it has. And for years, the kind of racism that has existed in terms of housing and employment and education and how our communities are developed, all that stuff has existed and has consequences. And we hope to demonstrate those consequences, because then people can begin to understand why it's so important to level the playing field. That, you know, that you're constantly running uphill while everybody else is running straight. And people wonder why you can't go faster, you know, while you're running uphill. And that becomes important for people to understand. And so I'm looking forward to us being able to structure programs that we've had in the past to encourage women in business, to assist them on how to apply for business licenses. And I've seen in some districts where people wanted an insurance for one of the school districts, and they pulled together all the minority and women insurance companies, and they formed a huge group that then provided insurance for Linwood's school district. I mean, there were so many things that you can do to help level the playing field, to give people an opportunity and a choice. But when you're confronted with Prop 209, and it says you can't do anything that's race-based and gender-based, then you really can't even begin to do what is there. We were just at the point of really beginning to open things up. When you look at what the contracting looked like in California, the fact that we had, you know, in most cities like San Diego, 30 and 40% of our contracts went to women and minorities in the city. Now it's at 1.5%. So when you start looking at the tremendous loss after all the work we did to help businesses come into our cities and counties and do work, and now we're back almost at step one again. And so we know what to do. In fact, we remember those things. Fortunately, after 24 years, there's still a lot of us around who remember how we were able to use affirmative action to create some sense of equity and opportunity for people and have a level playing field, beginning to level the playing field so people can work together. So I'm excited about that. We've talked to some of our mayors of our cities who are already imagining what it would look like, how they're going to open up opportunities. Why? Because their hands have been tied. And every time when I was chair of Citizens Equal Opportunity in San Diego, the commission for the city council, every program we attempted to do to try to bolster women in business, to try to help with one thing or another, we were confronted by people who didn't want to do it. Oh, that's a violation of Prop 209. We'll get sued, will this, will that. And so what happens is that the fear of that basically allowed those who didn't want to do it in the first place to have an excuse to not do it because they said it would take so long and so difficult. So I'm excited because I think there are a whole lot of things that we can open up. Housing issues, home ownership issues that we can target for folks who've been left behind to begin to do that. But you have to have the ability to do it. Otherwise, most of our programs will fall flat because we have to use all these other algorithms to try to figure out how to get to people who need it. And generally we'll get to a few, but we won't get to enough. And so I'm excited about it. It's interesting that our universities, people talk about that, University of California, the Cal State University, community colleges, all of their boards have approved Prop 16 because they know how much energy and time they have put in just to begin to have some sense of equity. And they realize that California needs a diverse workforce if we're going to accomplish anything. We can't keep importing people from other countries to come in and take the jobs here. We have to begin to educate our own children. And we know that we're falling short in terms of the number of BAs we need and so forth and so on. And that's going to come from the diverse population because that's the growing population. And so we have, so all of our institutions have said, yes, this is something we want to do. Our major cities, mayors, and others have said, yes, this is something we need to do because they are the ones in the trenches and they know how difficult it is to try to create equal opportunity and access, how difficult it is to try to help their constituents work and be active in things, how difficult it is to get our kids in schools and get them apprenticeships and programs that they've been left out of. And so it is a hard task. And so when we pass this, our mayors and city people have already started imagining what they're going to do to solve these problems because they know how to solve them. But the solution lies in some level of race and gender consciousness to create equity. And that's going to be important. So I'm excited about what will happen. I thank my good friend, Mr. Gibson, who's excited and passionate about things, but it is really, really important. And those who have not seen what we can do can only sit and imagine what will happen. But I'm confident that it is going to change the game. It's going to change the conversation in California. And it really is going to make us that progressive state we claim we are. And that's important.
Dr. Weber, thank you so much. And, this reminds me of something that the Greenlining Institute actually wrote about, in the fight for ACA 5, the health and economic equity teams wrote a blog entry, and they said something that I thought was so powerful, which is that race-neutral solutions can't fix problems steeped in race. And
Right.
So the promise of Prop 16 is for us to be able to have that consciousness, to be able to engage in the kind of deliberate and thoughtful and race and gender conscious policymaking that I think promises to help, I think, usher in a new era of equity and opportunity and justice. And so I appreciate, Dr. Weber, your excitement about the possibilities and the potential for what happens in the wake of Prop 16's passage. I wanted to move next to Dejan with Greenlining. And Dejan, I have a question for you. How can we communicate the importance of voting yes on Prop 16 to our youth and young adults?
Yeah, good question. First and foremost, I want to say thank you for the question, and it's an honor to be here alongside you all. I've gotten a lot of goosebumps in just hearing the conversation, so to participate again is definitely an honor. I also want to thank you all for raising the notion of there not being equal opportunity, right? And I would almost say that there has never been equal opportunity, right? You do your homework, you study, you listen to or read 1619 Project, you study Color of Law, read Color of Law, you read The Color of Money, you learn about the field order of March 1865, and you will understand that, a lot of things have been this way for a while. So the field has never been leveled. And so this is one, first and foremost, it's important to raise that point because it contextualizes everything that we're speaking to today. Excuse me. And secondly, I also want to thank Assemblymember Gibson in particular for raising Malcolm X and saying that, we've been bamboozled, because that is exactly the case. And so when I am thinking of this question of how do we effectively communicate, right, to the youth and the young adult, I would say it's imperative to be honest and to address this fact, because we recognize the fact that we've been bamboozled, right? We weren't of age. Personally speaking, I wasn't of age when Proposition 209 passed, so I wasn't able to really understand the implications of it at the time. However, I did grow up, and my peers alongside of me did grow up in the era of the colorblind, right? Where on one end we hear the rhetoric and we hear things that deny the reality that was glaringly apparent to us. Right? Instead, when you are, matter of fact, it reminds me of a African proverb that says, "The axe forgets, the tree remembers." Right? The axe forgets and the tree remembers. So to some extent, when it comes down to, you know, the folks that Ms. Weber mentioned, that, you know, some folks act as if they don't understand what's going on, where some of us didn't have that privilege. Right? When you grow up in Black and brown, you reap the realities, the disparately negative impacts of white supremacy, of racial ideology. And so, and growing up in this era, before COVID-19 exacerbated the pre-existing inequalities to a point of undeniability, we were aware of this. We saw our parent frustrations, despite them displaying the ambition, the determination, you know, the will essentially to achieve their version of the American dream, yet being denied, right, systemically being denied these opportunities. We grew up and remember Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, George Floyd. We saw what happened, right? And even to this day, Breonna Taylor. We're consciously taking notes of all of this. The fact that even on social media, which a lot of the youth is very, very actively engaged in, social media is circulating information that speaks to the walls of Breonna Taylor's neighbor receiving more justice than her. What does that tell us, right? What does that display for us? And so Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a book called Between the World and Me, in which he beautifully articulated the difference and the hypocrisy in growing up in one world while you have the ever-present view of the other, right? One where the grass is greener over there, it's clearly greener, right? We see that. Yet we hear, again, the racist ideologies and rhetoric that denies what is apparent to us. In that sense, you know, it's easy for us to grow with a bit of cynicism, right? And to be honest, to reach the youth, I would address this. I would be honest about this. I would be truthful and transparent that at this moment, as a society, as a nation, that we will no longer tolerate injustices and inequalities, and mean it, not just say it, but mean it. We need justice to be served now, and mean it. Right? We understand that we aren't as patient as everyone else because we reap the disparately negative impact of those fallacies again. So it will also raise the point that what brought us to this point of unfathomable and inhumane inequalities are the compounding effects of the racially charged policies that served white supremacy ideologies, which Prop 209 keeps intact. The denial of having representation in spaces of power where it's brokered and equity is negotiated, the denial of cultural competency, and so forth. So if you want to have a place, a city, a state where, you know, the intentions actually match the impact, where we see the changes that we want made, it starts with Proposition 16. It starts with yes on Proposition 16. And though it's not the antidote, it is the start. It is definitely a start, and there's no doubt about that.
Dejan, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your words, and you know, and just so appreciate you articulating the need for action, that it can't just be about words and intentions. It has to be about action. And, you know, we need to pass Prop 16 so that we have, you know, the capacity and ability to do much, much more when it comes to advancing racial and gender equity. And with that, I know our time is up, but I wanted to thank all of our leaders today for being part of this critical conversation. And for folks tuning in, please make sure to vote. Ballots are dropping this week. Start filling them out, start putting them in your mailbox. And please, please, please join the fight for Prop 16. To learn more, to sign up, to get involved, go to voteYes on prop16.org. Again, that's voteYes on prop16.org. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this conversation. And let's do this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andy and Assembly members, for that energizing conversation. At Greenlining, we are acting as if Prop 16 is going to pass, so we look forward to following up with you, Andy, and the members on our implementation ideas. For example, we are interested in pursuing the creation of a statewide Office of Racial Equity in the executive branch here in California that would be responsible for overseeing racial equity action plans for departments. We're also interested in pursuing a bill that would require equity analysis of legislation. So this would be really embedding racial equity into the very fabric of the legislature so that policymakers have the information that they need on bills. So we are hard at work. We look forward to following up with each of you soon. And thank you for that great conversation. Now, for the audience, it looks like we have 220 folks. Thank you all for being engaged. I hope you're feeling really excited about this conversation. Some reflections from that past conversation are that we have the data. We have all of the data that we need on racial inequities in this state, whether it's about health disparities or access to housing and employment. We have the data. We also know that when it comes to the burden of pollution for vulnerable communities, or even when we think about access to technology or broadband infrastructure, we know that there are disparities by race that are preventable, avoidable, and unjust. We also know that using proxies for race in decision-making, such as zip code, for example, only get us so far. So it's really imperative that we restore affirmative action, restore that ability to make specific and focused decisions on programs, policies, and initiatives. So I hope you are all feeling informed on that issue. Now we will transition into our last conversation of the day. We're going to take it home with a really important conversation about justice system reform, specific to propositions 17 and 20. We've touched on it a bit throughout this conversation, but at Greenlining, we really want to emphasize the importance of divesting in police and divesting in the prison industrial complex, and instead putting that money into healthy communities. So whether that's investing in mental health and trauma-informed care, for example, or workforce development and employment opportunities, there are a lot of opportunities to think about alternative economic models and ways to restore justice in our society. I would now like to invite Greenlining's Economic Equity Director, Adam Briones, to the stage. Hi, Adam, to help us, to lead us in moderating this next panel, which will feature Jay Vasquez, Donald Frazier, and also Jordana Wong. So please take it away, Adam.
Great, thank you. And if I could invite my panelists to turn their cameras on. So I see Jay, and I see Jordana, and then if I could also make sure that Mr. Donald Frazier turns his camera on as well, please. And while that's happening, I'll just go ahead and start my remarks because I think we're running a little bit behind schedule. So again, thank you, Kelsey, and good morning to everyone that's on the line. My name is Adam Briones, and I'm the Director of Economic Equity at the Greenlining Institute. I want to welcome everyone in the audience to our panel today, which we've titled Expanding Our Democracy, Inclusivity Through Justice System Reform. For those of you who have read our ballot initiative guide, this panel stems from our support of Prop 17 and opposition to Prop 20. Within that context, today we'll be talking about how we, as Californians, have the opportunity to take another positive step in reforming our criminal justice system by extending the right to vote back to those impacted by the justice system, as well as the opportunity to stop a regressive, outdated proposition that would roll back important justice reforms. Today, we have a great panel of advocates whose professional and personal experiences inform the work they do, day in and day out. Speaking personally, I'm extraordinarily proud to be sharing the stage with these three individuals, doing some of the most important and impactful work for our communities here in California. And it's with profound gratitude for that work that we welcome them to our event today. First, I want to welcome Jay Vasquez. Jay is the Participatory Defense and Policy Coordinator at Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice. At 16, Jay was processed through adult court and served 25 years in state prison. Currently disenfranchised, Jay is a member of the Free the Vote 2020 Coalition, which is working to restore the right to people to vote for people on parole in California, and the No on Prop 20 statewide coalition. Jay is an alumni of the Willie J. Brown Jr. Fellowship, and an alumni of the formerly incarcerated Convicted People and Families Movement Organizing Fellowship. Jay is currently in his senior year at SF State University, where he is majoring in sociology and minoring in criminal justice reform. Welcome, Jay. Next, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Jordana Wong. Jordana is a multiracial, system-impacted advocate, survivor, and creative. She serves as the Public Policy Associate for Starting Over, Inc., a community-based organization in Riverside, California, that practices holistic reentry and advocacy led by system-impacted people. There, she organizes for state and local change to further the rights of those impacted by the carceral system. Jordana is also a part of a community working group advocating for the liberation and protection of incarcerated folks in Riverside County during the COVID-19 pandemic. Jordana holds a BA with honors in political science with a focus on public service from UC Riverside. Welcome, Jordana. Lastly, it is my great honor to welcome Mr. Donald Frazier to our panel. Donald is the Executive Director at Building Opportunities for Self-Sufficiency, or BOSS, which is an organization whose mission is to provide housing for individuals with severe and persistent mental illness and further develop solutions to end mass homelessness, mass incarceration, and community violence. For more than 20 years, Donald has been a leader in the nonprofit management sector. Born in Cabrini Green housing projects in Chicago, his formative years were immersed in experiences and observations of concentrated and persistent poverty, inequitable economic conditions, and inequitable health outcomes. These experiences informed his life and his work and provided a foundation to further develop solutions to change the narrative and trajectory of individuals, families, and communities. Welcome, Donald. Before we start our panel discussion, I want to end my opening remarks by sharing 3 points on why Greenlining decided to focus on Propositions 17 and 20 specifically, and justice reform generally, for one of our 2 panels today. First, Greenlining is an organization committed to removing barriers to opportunity for people of color. Day in and day out, we work to remove barriers to economic dignity, barriers to health, barriers to technology access, and barriers to clean air and water. To be frank, this issue is so important to us because a person can face no bigger barrier to opportunity than not having the right to vote. Second, as policy advocates, we cannot hope to have a state that allocates money and resources fairly when we imprison far too many people and spend far too much money in doing so. Really quickly, just to share a few facts, the state of California spends roughly $50 billion annually on law enforcement and the criminal legal system and incarceration. This is about as much as we spend on the entire K-12 system annually. Unfortunately, those funds spent to imprison and police primarily go towards imprisoning and policing Black and brown communities. In California, our progressive, deep blue state imprisons Black men at a rate 10 times greater than white men. And despite making up only 6% of the state's population, African Americans make up 30% of the prison population. Latinos are also overrepresented in our prisons, where we make up about 45% of the prison population compared to about 36% of the state population. Third, and finally, as Fannie Lou Hamer said, nobody is free until everybody is free. Greenlining, as a multiracial, multi-ethnic organization that believes that none of our communities will have justice until all of our communities have justice. As an organization that is led by, staffed by, and serves people of color, this is an issue that is personal to me and all of my colleagues. So we're very grateful to all of our panelists and to you in the audience for being here today. And with that, I'd like to turn to Jay for our first question. Jay, can you tell us about the work that you do on Propositions 17 and 20 and what people need to know about them and why 17 and 20 are so important to you and your organization?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Well, like you mentioned, I work with different grassroots organizations throughout California, working in coalition to primarily pass 17 and to defeat 20. And so, as a formerly incarcerated person and currently disenfranchised, the 2 propositions on the ballot, they're personally meaningful to me. Prop 17 would restore voting rights to 57,000 Californians on parole, such as myself. And Prop 20, which is nothing more than a prison spending scam. This is more than just a criminal justice issue. This is a racial justice issue. 3 out of 4 people in California State Prison is a person of color. So when we talk about like felon disenfranchisement, what we're really talking about is suppressing the votes of Black and brown people. Because when we look at the argument for why we have such systems in place, they really don't make much sense other than voter suppression for communities of color. You know, first, parole is not simply prison on the streets. It's not a continuation of a person's sentence. I know the California Supreme Court has said that parole is not the part of the punishment phase. It's part of the reintegration phase. You know, 19 other states and the District of Columbia already allow people on parole to vote. You know, and in those states, they all have lower recidivism rates than California. And so, you know, when we talk about safety for our community, when we allow people on parole to vote, it gives them a stake in their community. And when they feel more part of their community, they're less likely to commit crimes. You know, these are people that have served their time. Their time is served, right? And they just want to start over. You know, I pay taxes. I volunteer in my community. I work full time. I go to school full time. And yet, it is a crime. It is a crime for me to vote. Voter inclusiveness, it makes our democracy stronger. In a so-called progressive state like California, you know, I wonder why felon disenfranchisement is still an issue. You know, it's still an issue here in California when 19 other states have already allowed people on parole to vote. There are people sitting in county jail. What makes it more confusing is that in California, people on probation, which is part of a person's sentence, they are allowed to vote. You know, there are people sitting in county jail right now that can vote, and here I am out in the free community, working, paying taxes, and yet my voice is silenced. So when we talk about felon disenfranchisement, it's wrong on so many levels and only makes sense as a tool for voter suppression of communities of color. And then we got Prop 20. Prop 20 is a prison spending scam, plain and simple. Prop 20 would cause over 10,000 more people to be incarcerated every year and take California backwards to its heyday of mass incarceration. And at a time when COVID-19 is ravaging through the prison system like wildfire, it makes absolutely no sense to flood prisons and jeopardize the lives of incarcerated people, prison staff, in their communities. You know, the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice Reform Justice just recently published a report that says that California's crime rate is the lowest it's been in recorded history. And this is at a time when the prison population in California has hit a 30-year low. So why are we talking about lowering the threshold for felony theft in California to just $250, which would happen if Prop 20 passes? You know, this means that young people can go to prison for stealing a bicycle or a pair of Air Jordans. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And I was incarcerated during the time of mass incarceration, during the peak of mass incarceration in California. And it was a horrible, horrible experience. You know, people were dying because they couldn't receive adequate health care. You know, prison healthcare staff, they just didn't have the capacity to treat everyone. And, you know, people at that time, suicide rates were up. People were committing suicide in there because the conditions were just so horrible. By packing everybody inside prison like that, it makes no sense to try to go back to those days of mass incarceration. Another thing Prop 20 would do is that it would require people charged with misdemeanors such as drug possession or petty theft to submit to DNA testing. And it's just another attempt to change laws to use as a tool to over-criminalize people of color. Because we know that when we give DAs the option of charging crimes as a wobbler, which Prop 20 would do, that is as a misdemeanor or a felony, Black and brown people are more likely than whites to be charged with a felony. So it's extremely important for racial justice in California that Californians vote yes on 17 and defeat Prop 20. And since I can't vote, I don't have that right to vote. And I'm out here working in coalition with other organizations to hopefully defeat 20 and pass 17. And so that's what I'm doing.
Thanks so much for that, Jay. I think that you really eloquently laid out the reasoning, and it's very simple reasoning for why we have to pass 17 and why we have to make sure that 20 doesn't pass. So thank you so much for your hard work on these issues And thank you so much for all the hard work that you do for our communities. And we really appreciate you for that. Jordana, I'd like to kind of turn over to you for the next question and take it to a somewhat broader level. Jordana, from your perspective and the perspective of Starting Over Incorporated, where does the conversation need to go after 2020 as it pertains to criminal justice reform? Where do you think the justice reform conversation is going in the next 3 to 5 years, either in California or nationally?
First, I would just like to take the opportunity to say thank you so much for having me here as a representative of Starting Over. And also that it's an honor to participate in this panel alongside so many people that are doing powerful work across the state. And it's just been such an energizing conversation. To answer your question, I think that if we take a step back and look at the momentum around racial and criminal justice happening in our state and nationwide, we can see that justice reform within the next 3 to 5 years, I think, is positioned to head in a direction where we'll be targeting eliminating exclusionary policies that perpetuate systemic racism and the reliance on prisons and policing. Similar to the work that's being done around freeing the vote for people on parole through Prop 17, Prop 17 is positioned to end felony disenfranchisement and restore the right to vote to thousands of Black and Brown voters. It's not to say that work like this hasn't been happening until now, but COVID-19 and the movement to liberate Black lives has provided people with a unique opportunity to join in organizing in a way that wasn't there before, providing the manpower that's needed to change the hearts and minds of decision makers and let them know that we're turning our community ask to hard policies and asking for concrete solutions now, and we're not going away. What I think that looks like for Starting Over is continue our efforts to decrease funding to the sheriffs and increasing funding to community-based solutions like rapid response teams. It also looks like challenging policies like crime-free housing ordinances in our county. This is one of the many ways that people of color are excluded from housing options due to conviction records. And when you have a system that disproportionately locks up Black and Brown people, it is unjust for exclusionary laws like crime-free housing to exist. So I see this and other policies that address racism and systemic racism from a wider lens, what folks are going to continue to organize around in efforts to create that racial equity that we're fighting for. I also think that justice reform will be more community-led than ever before. In this moment, we've been forced to reckon with the results of mass incarceration and the fact that we have a criminal legal system that was built on the idea that human beings are disposable. And in communities across the nation, and my very own in Riverside, people are beginning to actually question justice and safety as defined by the state. And we're asking, do we really want to perpetuate the status quo of punishment and retribution? And if not, what else is there? What else can we do? So we're having conversations and teach-ins about transformative and restorative justice, disability justice, and people are looking towards building something new, something that actually leads to rehabilitation, restoration, and healing.
That's awesome, Jordana. And I just want to really lift up one of the things that you just mentioned, which is talking about changing definitions. And as we change the definitions of what safety means in our community and how we change the definition of who is made safe and who is made not safe by our justice system, I think that's when we really get to the root causes or the root issues that you all are working on. And I just want to really say thank you for all the hard work you're doing out in Riverside and the impact it's having both there and throughout the state. So thank you for that. Now, I'd like to transition the conversation from more of the policy level and now to the practice level. And I'd like to turn to Donald. Donald, can you tell us about your work, what it looks like today, and maybe what would be the impact on your organization, BOSS, if these propositions either passed or if they fail?
All right, thank you. And good morning, everybody. And thank you, Adam. And distinguished panelists. Pleasure to be here. So again, my name is Donald Frazier. I'm the executive director of BOSS. It's Building Opportunities for Self-Sufficiency. And our geographic footprint is in Berkeley, Oakland, Hayward, and San Leandro, Alameda County. Our mission is to help poor and disabled people achieve health and self-sufficiency. And we also fight against the root causes of poverty and homelessness. And we know that people released from prison are 10 times more likely to be homeless than the general public. And if you're Black or brown, it increases. And if you're facing a lot of the policies that Jordana was talking about, it's even tougher. In addition to the question of, we were talking about, is incarceration the cause of poverty, or is poverty the cause of incarceration? And we know the historical criminalization and disenfranchisement of Black skin, from slavery to Black codes to Jim Crow to the drug war, that created jobs and generational wealth for white skin. So it's no secret that what we're facing. From a BOSS perspective, our North Star is to eliminate racially based policies that cause systemic inequities. So we develop solutions to mass incarceration, mass homelessness, and community violence with programs and services tailored to meet the needs of our people, the people we serve. And we're dedicated to the inclusion of people marginalized by trauma, incarceration, poverty, racism, sexism, homelessness, and violence. We're also dedicated to meeting the basic human needs while fighting the underlying causes of social, economic, and racial inequity. And we operate a range of programs and services across Alameda County, which include shelter, housing, workforce development, reentry and justice programming, mental health services, peer mentoring, leadership development, and all these programs and services are designed to help people achieve housing, security, gainful employment, social connection, civic engagement, and lasting wellness. So kind of a quick overview of the services that we actually provide. So we have 147 emergency shelter beds, 48 units of permanent supportive housing, and we have master lease partnerships with landlords and property owners to place people in permanent housing. And we provide housing navigation and housing retention services as well. In our reentry and neighborhood safety space, we developed 3 neighborhood impact hubs serving the city of Oakland. So Oakland is pretty much ground zero for homelessness, crime, folks returning home from prison, poverty. Oakland is ground zero. So we identified sites in East Oakland and Deep East Oakland, West Oakland, and downtown Oakland, where we're calling it our neighborhood impact hubs. And again, with the highest rates of poverty, violence, crime, and overall inequity. And we provide employment services, job training, barrier removal services, health referrals, family reunification, rental assistance, peer outreach to re-engage justice-involved folks who are disconnected from services. We have reentry housing and our social justice collective, which I'm really excited about. And Tim Smith, our deputy director of reentry and neighborhood safety programs, heads this up. And it's a cohort-based leadership development process with an emphasis on policy reform, organizing, advocacy, and education, where we develop leaders with lived experience to fight social, racial, and economic injustice. And I'll end by saying, 90% of our staff have lived experience in the justice system. And we're proud of that. And as it relates to 17 and 20, these folks have jobs, they have benefits, they have their own homes, some have their own homes, some are still renters. Nevertheless, they're independent human beings and they deserve a right to vote. And so whether they're on parole or whether they're not on parole, if they're in the community, they deserve the right to vote. And that kind of question around disenfranchisement, it's nothing new, it's no secret, it's by design, and it's been going on for centuries. We know that. And as far as 20 is concerned, a lot of survivor rights organizations, victim rights organizations, and the general public supports programs and services, not a more harsh, what Prop 20 would bring to the table, would basically eliminate the service structure that we have for people returning home, right? And so we're definitely fighting a good fight against that. And again, a lot of this, I've been in this business for 30 years, and I started back in the 90s when the drug war just got really insane, right? And when the prison population spiked in the 90s, and you know, I was working for an organization where we went inside the prison to provide substance abuse treatment, right? Because somewhere that was the answer, that's where the money was. Whether it was the answer or not, it's irrelevant. The question is, it was a dumb policy that destroyed the lives and generations of human beings in Black and brown communities, and primarily Black communities. And there's no apology for that. But now everybody's saying, hey, you know, it was a mistake, right? How many years later, how many decades later, and in the ruins of communities that have imploded, families that have been devastated, and then individual lives that they can never really recover from, right? And so now here's Prop 20 on the table, right? It's just, you know, I won't use the words that I'm thinking right now, right? But it's insane. It is absolutely insane. And so I'll stop there and just know that we're in the fight.
That's awesome. Thank you, Donald. And I think it's so great to hear that as we talk about these larger policy issues that are so impactful, that we also hear about what you and other similar groups are doing on the ground to serve families and individuals day in, day out. So thank you so much for your work. We're at about 10:58 now, and I think that Kelsey's going to come back and probably wrap up the show in a moment. But perhaps our panelists, if you could give in as short amount of time as possible, one way for people that are not involved in this movement to contribute to the great work that you're doing, you know, what would it be? And maybe we could start with Jay first. Jay, if there was one way that people can be involved, what would you recommend?
I would recommend just making people aware, you know, aware that right now we're at a moment to really dismantle one of the most oppressive systemic racism tools, which is felon disenfranchisement. To make people aware of that, what it really is. You know, it's not just a criminal justice issue, it is a racial justice issue. And as long as we understand that, people are going to make the right decision at the ballot box. The same thing with Prop 20. You know, as long as people understand that, look, this is another attempt to create laws to over-criminalize Black and brown people to flood the system again, then people are going to make the right decisions come November, come next month.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. And thank you for being on this panel. Jordana, any closing thoughts really quickly on how people can be involved and support you in your work?
Yeah. So again, to kind of echo what Jay was saying, vote yes on Prop 17, no on Prop 20, yes on 16. If you can vote, get out there and participate and do what you need to do. Also for starting over, to donate and learn more about what we're doing and the resources that we provide to the community out in Riverside and in Los Angeles, head over to our website, that's startingoverinc.net. You can also follow us on social media at startingoverinc.ca if you want to get involved in our community organizing work. To hold the sheriff accountable, follow us at Boot Bianco, and at Riverside, all of us are known on Instagram.
Great, thank you, Jordana, and thank you again for being on the panel. Mr. Frazier, would you like to close us out with just a few brief words on how we can support your work going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think a lot of times folks are eager to support and want to support and just don't know how, and I appreciate the opportunity right now to inform folks. I'll give you a quick example. You know, when the current administration were housing folks that were coming across the border, basically jailing these young people, and still are, quite frankly. And a lot of folks were saying, man, this is ridiculous, and how can I help, right? It's like, pick up the phone, make a phone call, go to a rally, like figure out who's advocating against these ridiculous policies and get involved, right? I'd say, you know, we're training the next force of social justice warriors who are formerly incarcerated. So I'll say, you know, help us support that. Self-sufficient, self-sufficiency.org. Find our social justice page and donate, and help us continue to train the next cohorts of social justice warriors to continue to fight against these wrongs. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you, Donald. And thank you to Jay and Jordana and everyone that joined us today. I think we're at time, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Kelsey, but this was an excellent conversation. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam, Jay, Jordana, and also Mr. Donald Frazier. That was a really powerful conversation. I appreciate you sharing your professional experience as well as your very real personal and lived experience. One of my reflections, I think Jay, you mentioned this, that if we vote yes on Prop 17, that would restore the right to vote for 57,000 folks on parole. That is huge. We cannot stand for systemic voter suppression. And I really hope that to our audience and all the folks who have joined us today, you're feeling empowered to use your right and your privilege to vote to advance racial justice this November. I encourage you all to register to vote as well as to sign up for our email list at Greenlining so that we can keep in touch and stay engaged. So thank you all for joining, and we will be in touch soon. Have a good day, everyone.